Hello, everybody. Welcome to mini proposal workshop. Today, our topic is key performance measurements. I prepared ourselves agenda, and our main context is we are using mini proposal workshop templates to ideate on AI tooling for decentralized groups. And this recording will be uploaded to Swarm YouTube and perhaps even in the Europe town hall, as we are the guests in here. I will first give you an overview of mini proposal templates. I will cover some brief outcomes, what came out of each of these templates. Then I'll share a bit of a progress bar to get the context of where we position. And then we dive into today's topics, which is about ideating on measures. We will go to two different discussion questions. How would you measure proposal outcomes and risk mitigations? That is something we will get from the last session. And are there any indicators you could measure from Project Catalyst challenge, as we picked one of the challenges and then we could ideate on that. We may not reach to all of these discussions, but that is something we set out to try to achieve. And if we don't achieve these outcomes, we will just carry it on to the next sessions. And finally, I'll finish up with the next section schedule. I give an overview, and then we do some lesson learning to improve the way we are constructing these workshops and the templates. So, overview. I zoom out, you will see a lot of content here. And on the main window, on this red bar, you will see a bunch of chapters. So, in the first chapter, we did like problem ideation. So when we came in here with the context of how to help people to use AI tooling and how would we adapt them to decentralized groups, which is even harder than just a business that has a specific use case, we had to start thinking of the problem statement and how do we address it. And the first problem statement we made up with was disseminating and documenting meetings are time-consuming activities. Then, on a second session, we were ideating on how to resolve this, what it needs to be done in order to achieve that. And we came to the conclusion that we need a sustainable open source community infrastructure that provides an AI tool to automate meeting documentation and retrieve insights. So we're already targeting here very specific areas of meetings and documentation of that. After that, we had this kind of special chapter we made up in the meanwhile to scope down, because that was a very big scope of solution and the problem. So we made it into smaller components and tried to understand each of these components. Then we had a session of creating a proposal title. We thought about the type of the proposal we're making and what it relates to as in taxonomy, and discussed a little about stakeholders or who would be related to that proposal. And then we had a shifting game. So when we talk about this like big idea, and then we actually selected down into specific area, which was called collaboration. And then we did the problem statement and solution statement again. So if I move left, here we have a progress bar. So we spend a lot of time in solution ideation. That was this making sense of the solution components, ideating on them. And then we found out the Darlens platform, open source platform, but using AI inside. And then we do some deciding on solution strategy. And then we started doing this problem and solution ideation, again, based on previous information. And what we had as a problem statement then, when we scoped down, we thought that open source DAO platforms that use AI are not being integrated with each other. And then we find that our solution would be to create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. After that, I went over that we created a title, we had stakeholders, and now recently we finished defining success, and now we're working on key performance measurements. I covered the schedule later, but today we are in a parent town hall, So we will see that every week we will have a new session, and next week we're looking into Latin town hall. Then we move right, here we will see the defining success. And this is the results we'll be going to using from last session. So I'm gonna copy paste the expected outputs and outcomes to our current part, which I prepared for today. And we're going to now address the first area of like, how would we measure these sticky notes? For this, I would actually open up a bit of like brainstorming time. Maybe an example would be needed. So yeah, okay, let's do one example, and then everybody let's join in the whiteboard and do some note taking on here. So when we look at this, for example, we have standard documentation. So this is an outcome we have documentation, and it is describing a standard. How can we measure? And let's say we use white color, and now we will need to measure that. How would you measure a standard documentation? So I will say how many paragraphs. Yeah, later we may start like, is that really relevant or not? So basically we're asking questions from is there in standard. Perhaps we even want to get like that feeling of how many people are using it. So likes or reads or something that we can track that the standards are being used. Yeah, I have no other ideas. And then we basically go through all of these yellow sticky notes, and everybody will take one and see how we could measure that output or outcome. And later we will aggregate into the that information. And the end goal is to get something like this, where we start grouping these similar standards together. We can visualize it, and we will see like, oh, which KPIs we will drop, which KPIs we will keep.
Yeah, Tivo, on that, the note that you're writing right now, that's kind of a question that comes up to me in my mind. If when we integrate DAO Lens into the Insight.IQ platform, some components might be their API endpoint, and we're just calling their API endpoint. In some cases, we may need to customize the code itself. So we would fork it and then use our own, but we want that to be traceable back to DAO Lens. And then the other one is importing their API into SingularityNet's marketplace and consuming those, as well as making our own custom version of their API and putting that on SNet. Does that play a role in here, do you think?
The question is, for now in this experiment, we would write down all the options we could want to measure, but when we go forward, we may think like a meta KPI that we don't go very specific. Is it now using that component from their platform or our platform or somewhere else, just to simplify ourselves? But if it's like trivial thing, like it's happening anyway, we have that information and it's automated, then we might as well keep it, and so that we later can measure did your custom solution to implement to use the DAO Lens platform, did it increase the amount of being used, for example, compared to the components which are just direct APIs? Yeah, I'm not sure what kind of insight we may get, but right now this is all about coming up with measurements.
Okay.
And I will write that down there.
Yeah, because it comes up in my mind mainly because we're also thinking about our tokenomics model, and a lot of this plays a part in our tokenomics model. Like we want, our platform gets revenue, but we want to distribute some of that revenue to the core contributors, like the open source platforms, the DAOs, the so on and so forth. So we need to be able to measure their level of interaction on our platform. So it comes up often in the topic of tokenomics, but the way you just presented it, well, in this particular scenario, we don't care about how, and that makes sense. Our intention here is identifying key performance measurements for this particular project of AI tooling for decentralized groups. I just feel like I'm kind of struggling on, is it for a specific project and tool, or is this the general talk of AI tooling for decentralized groups overall, even outside of Cardano? Like the scope is what's not clear to me.
So right now we are targeting the collaboration. So we are looking at if our solution is to create community standards on how to introduce interoperable AI features. And all of these sticky notes are the things we say we will do on this proposal. And then these measures we're coming up right now are used to measure that these outcomes are valuable. Like, how do we know that we succeed, basically? These what we say we'll deliver are measurable. Like, it can be checked. We can hypothesize, oh, well, when we want API connections and costs, we can now assume what would be the success for us based on our current understanding.
And are we trying to avoid adding yellow stickies and just expanding on the yellow stickies with the white ideas?
We can expand, but yeah, then we need to consider that every expansion would mean scope just increases. But yeah, I mean, there is never too little. But we still need to keep in mind that we are now working on a proposal that is meant to increase the collaboration, and the way we are increasing the collaboration and understanding is that we are creating community standards.
Yeah.
So if you're now creating an AI, then it wouldn't be standard because then you're creating an AI.
Yeah. I think where I'm heading with it is example template. And then we talk about a proof of concept on how to integrate one. And from that, so if we can take two open source platforms or DAOs or whatever components, integrate them, establish a framework, then try to apply that framework to another one and see how well it does. That I see as like a way to measure. Did the framework succeed in a third integration? And gathering the metrics from that, but I don't know where to put that here. So building the framework itself and then testing the framework against another integration.
Yeah, I would actually write it as you said it. A measurement is how many times was this framework re-implementable, or how, and here even further, is how many times the framework was implemented to have actually a successful plugin or a feature and outcome.
Yeah, I'm still kind of struggling myself. I'm trying to take the perspective of how do we create a standard? And a lot of these areas are subjective in the sense of like how you would measure some of this stuff might change from person to person or community to community. is there room for a standard in some of these areas is what comes to my mind. Some of the other ones like that you've been contributing to, I can see a standard that could arise. But like videos and file formats, like, well, what if somebody wants it one way and somebody else wants it another way? Are those two different standards, or is there just no standard and they allow people to utilize the data how they see fit? I'm not sure.
Well, these ones, for example, these are templates, how we collaborate and what are the expectations. So technically, in our case, these would already be answered. So we don't need to, I think, look into that, because how we collaborate and what are the expectations is a document. This is basically the constitution, or like, I don't know, bad word maybe, but like the way we collaborate and work. And this is a standard documentation, and how we measure it is how many paragraphs is there in standard and how many times standard is used. Maybe this is not a good way to measure, but these are examples I came up with. And all of these are basically the outline of that. How to integrate tools with selected platform. Well, here we could ask how many times was this template used to integrate tools, like how many integrations is made to the platform or based on the standard.
This is kind of how I see the standard is this, like the standard is to capture these high level metrics, but not the metrics themselves. Like for instance, like you said, how many paragraphs, how many times, blah, blah, blah. I see that as culture. You know, one community wants to measure the number of paragraphs. Another community wants to measure the number of posts or contributions to the document or revisions or whatever, right? Like they might be measuring different metrics, but the act of measuring a metric as part of a standard makes sense, right? No matter what you're measuring, there needs to be some measurement that's accounted for that contributes to this standard documentation. Like, can we establish an actual standard document, quote unquote standard, or is that culture based, meaning it's going to differ based on the ecosystem, but we just have the high level framework of you need this, 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 and this as part of your standard, but how you implement it or use it can vary. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that, Tivo?
Yeah. Well, I totally agree on you. Perhaps if I scope out. So what we do with these measures is basically we select what makes most sense to measure. And this will be our front end, basically, to the community, because these are the measurements we report on progress reports and on the final closing report when you finish the proposal. So these are like proposal measures to know that this proposal was successful.
I see. Okay, so two different scopes. The scope of how do we measure the success of the proposal, and then how do we measure the second scope being how do we measure the success of the integration itself, right? Or the standard. Is that what you're?
Yeah, and to me, these are two same things. Like because I wouldn't, because right now we are only looking at the proposal direction. Okay, these are the measures people will see when we start doing stuff, and then they can see, okay, they are doing standards, how many times the standard is used, like, and the way we capture it. Yeah, that is a lot of, like you said, like a cultural thing. Like, when does this integration count? Does it just count when there is an API connection, there's a GitHub but never used? Does this integration count? Or does it have to be some kind of, and if it doesn't follow the standard, but it's integrated, and does this count? So there are like a lot of elements that are still coming down to like a human decision. So, and on that term, we're jumping ahead, but we may not want to use these kinds of measurements then, because if it's like a very loose. But for in current situation where we're just brainstorming all of these options, I wouldn't see that as a problem. And then when we have all of these measurements, then we can start in picking and choosing. And what do we want for proposal? How do we measure the actual building of that? I think that will come as a time, basically, when we actually start executing that.
Yeah, very valid points. Okay. And I always see like exchange of value as success. So like if this proposal builds a standard or builds a framework or even just a questionnaire, and then people use that questionnaire and get value from it, then to me that's success, regardless of monetary value. But yeah, so that's how I'm looking at these measurements is how can we see the value that it's producing or helping somebody or facilitating this and that. Yeah. I'll keep trying.
They just came up with an idea like how many collaborators sign the F10 style of collaboration that could be coming from the standard. Like if we come up with the standard, do we want to kind of sign it, and do we need to kind of find how many people agree with that, and then we can use that as a measurement.
I like that. Yeah, because that is kind of something I've been working on, like a partnership contract almost. And here's the, we want to make it a fair exchange of value. We're acquiring your services for our platform, but maybe you're acquiring growth in your community or access to more developers to help with the development of your tool, like some kind of exchange in value. And so I like this concept of going to the community to sort of figure out what that document should look like.
And I'm putting it to the standard documentation because I think this could be applied to all of these standards. Like every standard is now, well, we have this standard now, can we agree to sign it? And then how many people will sign? Although we may need to, yeah. And maybe actually another idea, getting a sentiment. How ready is this standard? What you think? So it's a quantitative, but it's still, if you ask it every 2 months or every 3 months, or like, then people will be, well, we did these new paragraphs, we added these features, we added these paragraphs. Does it feel more ready now? And then who had new people usually put, yes, 5, this is perfect, but more sophisticated, more people who have more knowledge say, there's actually these few things missing, so I'm going to give it to 3 or 4, like if you're going to make a quantitative measuring.
True, I do see this as a living document. And man, it would be nice to have a process or a platform where the community can discuss it similar to how we do the SIP structure. Here's a standard, that we'd like to, that it really is kind of what it is a SIP in a way, but it's outside of Cardano. I guess it's more in the AI, but having people contribute to the development of the standard and give feedback and debate would be very valuable, I think, extremely valuable and almost necessary, because the way you're describing it, I see it as a living document, meaning the version is going to constantly change. We're going to every 2 months, 3 months, potentially find a change that's needed to keep up with the technology. So having a platform where you can have that discussion, it's just ever going discussion. Okay, here's the standard that we all approved at one point. And now we need to continue to scrutinize that standard, right? We're constantly scrutinizing that standard. And at some point, it's going to change again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I included then how often the documentation version changes. And that could be then, we can, over timeline, you will see, we have crazy explosion of updates again. we can correlate it with new people, collaborating with new DAOs, finding new products to integrate. And that is something that is interesting to correlate and see. And if it's very often, then we may need to think, okay, is this working? Is this changing all the time? Is it good for us? How could we improve it? If it's not changing at all, does it mean the standard is ready to be more widely acceptable, or it's not used at all? Like these are like all the things that could come from this, looking at the numbers. Then for all of the standard documents, we have workshops, and I think the workshop will be related to same metrics as this: amount of participant, amount of workshops, videos if they are public, and duration of these workshops. What we also, for example, do in this session is this. We're just gonna take that and these questions, how easy it was to participate.
That could almost be summarized as just like surveys, right? Almost, because what, whether you're capturing the participation rating or some other metric, it's a survey. Or you want the standard to include those specific metrics.
Yeah, well, what we are coming up right now, these are not standards. These are just what we put into proposal, what we do. Okay. Although, yes, we could say that we just have surveys, but then what do you measure? You measure how many times you do surveys? Like it still comes down, what is that exact thing then you do? It's like, yeah, you can do whatever surveys, but we need meaningful surveys. And then that's why I would go down to explicitly finding the questions.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
We could measure qualitative feedback in a way that how many times feedback was given.
Like, there's a lot that could be done in that category, in that area. So if we use AI to capture the sentiment, so say part of the survey is open text like yours is, you have 2 or 3, and it's just open text. AI can actually grab sentiment or embeddings like what topics were talked about. So you can aggregate that from text. So I think that opens the door essentially for more metrics to be gathered than just 1 through 5 type stuff.
Just curiosity, would that be an extra work to kind of establish that connection to get the sentiment? Well, let's just write it. What is the sentiment from AI? Is the from what did you say? Questionnaire?
Like from text. So what is the sentiment from text, maybe using AI?
A survey is from survey.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Survey text using AI.
Yeah.
So it's the sentiment score from surveys. Survey qualitative questions using AI. And qualitative questions can be, what did you learn?
Bill, I have a problem with going too deep and complex. So if we're capturing how strongly do you feel that the session progressed as best as possible, and then there's another text field. So if they rated it as like 1, and there was another text field for would you improve this? aggregating all those responses and churning it into here's the most common response and suggested change. But that's not part of the standard. I'm thinking like, should that be part of the standard to where you capture the feedback? That's one thing, but you need to use that feedback. And should that belong as part of the standard, enforcing that you do something with that feedback, not just collect it?
I'm not sure where the standard comes in or why is it needed there, but actually you do have a good point that having, basically how could you improve that? What is improvement? So we did have these questions, because how we use it is, again, we use it on the proposal. We are collecting that information and we sharing that as a front-end expectation and what people are funding for. So this is what we are measuring.
Okay. But you're reading all that, right? Like every time somebody fills this in, you're manually reading these.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and technically we can not read these, like, and just say, well, we are collecting that for 1 month for all of these workshops, and then it's still like the ideal is that you just still publish it. Like, we have these workshops and these are these metrics and you can find them here. And if you voted our proposal, you want to show how we got, this is in the end how we're going to measure the success of that, the success of our proposal. And probably we will look at much of them, like every sessions, and see like, are we going to the same correct direction? Because the goal here is not to just get funded and get proposal done. So in the context that we want, because we're actually trying to improve the entire ecosystem and the communication and all the groups and the communities. The proposal is just one means to get the resources to get on with collaborating. Okay, so then we have so many data, blah, blah, final format. I don't know what does that mean. Audio will be transcribed and discarded. Video will be transcribed and discarded. I guess. How many videos? Many videos were uploaded to be transcribed. Audio files were uploaded to be transcribed. And maybe how many characters or how much text it created. Is that something interesting to measure?
I don't see it that way. Not really.
One way you could say, well, from this month we had 1,000 words we transcribed. Next month we saw increase to 10,000 words. So we can kind of capture the demand. It's not also another thing. You have probably have more experience. You don't transcribe this in seconds either, maybe. So probably we could perhaps measure how much time it takes to transcribe.
Yeah, I think that's a good measurement. Maybe not necessarily for a measurement of the proposal's success, but it definitely should be a measurement captured. The way I see this is how can we evaluate the success or impact of, right, this proposal would be, so audio files and video files were transcribed or consumed by the AI. It's actually what metrics did we extract from that? And then did they contribute to the standard document? So for instance, video, Zoom does capture timestamps, and so you can choose, do I want those timestamps or do I ignore the timestamps because I don't care? And that's like a standard. Do I want the timestamps, the speaker's, name or login alias? Do I want, see, there was timestamps, the chat conversation inside of the video, the meeting. See the people there's a few metrics that we can grab. Do those work themselves into the standard document? And how can we observe that here? So we transcribe the audio, we transcribe the video, what metrics were captured, and like how did that become valuable? Yeah, I feel like I'm going way off. I tend to go deeper than necessary. So because I don't see what's the value. So we do audio and transcribe it and video and transcribe it. How does that relate to the proposal itself?
Yeah, well, actually, your thought process helped to discard these KPIs.
Okay.
So I'm gonna, because yes, it doesn't give us value, and this would be the next step of that KPI process when we have all of these metrics and we're like, oh, that's interesting, and that is something that is on that we don't really need that, and this causes, well, this is kind of cool, but it causes headache to kind of, because in the end we need to actually start then pulling that information in, and that's an extra work somebody has to do, implement, and then also operate to kind of keep it on track. So yeah, today we are all just brainstorming, and you went step ahead and said why it's not needed. So you're totally correct way. But I'm just in this ideation mode right now, where I just put stuff even if it doesn't add value.
Makes sense. Yeah, no, I like it. I have to get in that mindset. I'm trying to keep up with the Devo.
Yeah. So meeting domain specific language, how would we measure that? I think you bought quite a good barrier in my head now, so that yes, a small great filter is now happening in my in my front lobe. But oh no, this measure can't be that. Right now, I don't know how to measure that. Inspiration from AIDSL, so that was just the context, and meta type talk was a product. And how would we measure that in context of proposal? Okay, so we did go through this now. We gathered a bunch of sticky notes, and now the question is, we now worked on outcomes, but we have now also risk mitigations where we need to work on that. So I'm gonna do a slight drag down, and then I'm going to take this chapter and we do this process all again. And now we skip the red ones, but all of these next to the yellow ones again. So we have downlines inside the queue. We can disregard them based on the fact that we already have mentioned that, and inside the queue we probably would use the same logic as this one. So we don't really need to create here again. But we have get more context there. Have a few partners who already have the interest to integrate with each other. So we clearly need how many partners are building on same standard.
Oh yeah.
On our collective standard, on how to collaborate and what are the expectations. This we also covered on the outcome. That's just the standard. So I'm going to turn this. Start off by integrating easier but still highly useful features, targeting API endpoints to make it easiest to integrate. So how many API endpoints we have connected? Maybe it's already covered by integrations, which we discussed on the previous. Some things are too specific. Yeah, they are. When more requests from same features come from different perspectives, there will be more thought put this. So that's the how many feature requests are for standard and how many similar or duplicate feature requests are for standard from different groups. Can't make it accountable because it's open source. Features are not updated often. I don't know. I'll have a large enough community to have more skills to improve existing products. And we kind of covered
resources.
So but how would we measure that? How many links we have?
Have large enough community to have more skills to improve the existing. So time, yeah, this is on the topic of staying applicable or valuable in the fast moving industry. And then one of them is to have a large enough community. So I think it's have a large enough community that has the necessary skills. So you're decentralizing the work, which means bounty boards, collaboration, so on and so forth. But I don't see how that's.
Oh, that's interesting. That would open up a new how many open tasks and activities that are available.
That's kind of how I see it. Is it's a workforce.
Yeah. Then there's a lot of parallelism in the tools that we develop. The microservice architecture that assumes we're going to create microservices. How many microservices
or support it, right? Like, because that I think microservices getting built would be a success, meaning we've created this standard. That standard can inform the developers of the microservices that here's what your consumers are doing and using and the metrics that they're wanting. So then people now can build microservices because they have a standard to build from. Right? Without a standard, then microservices can't exist because it's like proprietary or it's specific to the use case. So this does make a lot of sense to me.
API calls we covered on the previous monetization models. And can we measure monetization model? Oh, yes, we can.
That does go back to that previous question. I feel like, how do we incorporate API architecture versus singularity net, marketplace. So marketplace implementations. And if you fork somebody's open source code, make changes to it and use it on your platform, how do you bring that into your monetization model?
I guess that is also something that as we build, we come up and like it's doesn't mean we failed if we have like, well, we had these metrics that we said we're gonna say that how much we distributed, how many subscribers have. Maybe none of our models will be subscription based, but and then we just have it 0 running across the screen all the time.
Yeah.
The revenue from platform schools with distributed. Yeah, I can address this again. Monetization model. Have an open source collaboration ethos. Kind of covered that in here with the how many collaborations signed the standard. Inform community of development and licensing expectations. I'm not sure do we need like how many licenses we have. I think this is not giving any information to us. Picking the right license with revenue and value. Yeah, that is hard to measure.
Well, I mean, I guess we could measure what licenses people are using, but I feel like this creating the standard goes down a road where we're identifying that there isn't a license that perfectly fits these collaborative entities. And so does that mean that now a new license actually needs to get established? I don't know, but identifying that, I feel like is a metric that could be like,
oh,
how many different licenses?
So you're saying we are creating licenses?
Well, no, I mean, I think the industry is due for a new license that supports decentralization more natively, right? Like a lot of these licenses, it's either open for everybody or it's monetized, or you can use the code, but not for money, and there's not a license that says, oh, these multiple entities, multiple businesses collaborated to create this product. There isn't a license that really identifies that. So by us capturing what licenses people or projects are using, especially DAOs and open source communities, we'll see a disparity potentially, and that there's a need for a new license. We wouldn't create that license. Maybe we would host the conversation potentially, because that's a huge industry, right? Like that's developer wide ecosystem, not just blockchain or crypto or any of that. That's like developers at large need a new license for how collaborative entities, I think, build products.
Yeah, we could try that, because then it's like when new person joins in, where we uses this and this license, and then we can just measure, okay, we have now 6 groups. Out of 6 group, 4 of them use this license. It's still an insight. It's something that we can, when it scales. Yeah, and that's just a topic we just go through when onboarding new people, I guess. And if they don't know, and that's also an information, if they don't use license, then we're like, okay, 0. But that means we are, with this innovation so far ahead, we don't even know how to license it.
Yeah.
Which is, although we kind of know that it's a huge issue, but then we make it more explicit, I guess.
Okay.
AI is a property for some platforms and not for sharing. Have them use Singularity Marketplace so we could consume their tool. We covered using Singularity API, the uneven competition. They're using the same tools as us, but they have extra features that we are not able to use. So here we could measure how many times a feature, a component is used by somebody else, but I feel like that is an extra work to do, although that validates that we are doing the right thing. But I don't really see that as a need to measure. I think this is something like a headliner that we could do for marketing. Oh, they are also using that. They got it from us or something, but we don't really measure that, and we can track, oh, you are using it, you are using it.
Yeah. What is the context here? Because I agree with these statements. AI is proprietary for some platforms and not available for sharing. But if they have an API endpoint, so say it is proprietary and closed sourced, but they have an API and we can consume it, then we don't really, it doesn't need to be open source.
Yeah, I guess because this was a risk, all of these red ones are risks. And the idea here was that somebody doesn't have the API and it doesn't give the access, and it just says, well, I do what you do, but better, but it's a subscription model, paid model. You don't know how I do it better, but everything you build, I will pull to my platform. So nobody needs to come to your platform because, but we also offer this extra like upscaling features that we don't share. So that's like the uneven competition thing.
Okay. So I see. We're just identifying the risk. I see. Not trying to explore it too much, just identify that risk. Okay.
Yeah, we came up with two solutions, and now we kind of brainstormed if we can measure how do we mitigate it.
Gotcha.
But I wasn't really clear how can we and should we, because it's, yeah, maybe we should, maybe there is somebody out there in the ether looking at this like, well, I work in this area and we could do this, and your feedback would be very welcome.
Yep.
All right, so we did go through ideating on these measurements. We went through all of them, and now we have another question. Are there any indicators you could measure from Project Catalyst challenge? And so we're able to place through quite fast. I will actually then go into this. We picked Atala Prism. I'm gonna copy paste this challenge here. And here we also was asked to measure something. Complete Atala Prism program. Can we measure that? Yes, we can. That's interesting because we just had Atala Prism here. They will.
I was just thinking about that. It reminded me. I did want to ask a question, because he was talking about the book. I don't remember ever getting the book, and I did the Pioneer program, and then Emergo had me go through a couple courses for Atala as well. So I don't know what I need to do to get the book, but I'll have to look into it.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So that was like a way to get that book for participating and going through the course.
Yeah, it could be I just didn't do something at the end of the course, because I went through the Pioneer program. Was it a different course he was talking about?
No clue.
The one, yeah, like I don't.
I remember there was a question from me in Discord to get contact if you want an NFT, but I was like, well, I didn't do any of the coding sessions. I only wanted to listen and learn how to.
And I did a lot of the coding sessions in my own local environment, but I never submitted anything. You know what I mean? Like they don't know that I did any of that work. I was just kind of doing it on my own. So I don't know how. I guess there was no credentials or validations. I don't know. I'll have to go through and look at it again when I have time.
Yeah. The measurements we could do is how many partners participate in these courses, and then how many partners finish those courses. I think this is what they would be expecting us to measure. Complete the governance framework workshop with IoG. Sure. Establish or join governance framework working group to add trust over IP or another host organization. This is more like a yes, no. Work on things like list of public identity utilities, utility case studies, concept terminology. Accessibility standards, best practices. Yeah, so these are things we are doing. It's not really the way we measure it. It's like yes or no. So I don't know, do we want to pull that into the proposal? Identify stakeholders, including issuers, holders, verifies policymaker and their business requirements.
So on the first one where you're talking about Atala Prism Pioneer Program, are you talking about the actual partners taking the Atala Prism or the proposers of this proposal taking? So partners. That's what you're saying?
To me, actually, this is the partners with, yeah, technically proposals, but plus all, because we're not doing this only for us. We are doing it in public space, all of these standards. And then we can also like, Bill, when you're already working on this and figuring out and doing workshop with us every week on this area, maybe you're interested in Atala Prism because this is an identity area and like, and basically, and we are giving that code or something that if you go through this through our system, we kind of, yeah, let's say we market Atala Prism through our proposal. But it's a cool thing because the discussion there is very much what we need in our work. So it's like a hand-in-hand work. So those who have the capacity to come to our meetings and also learn to do standards through Atala Prism, and it's like win-win.
Okay. So I like that idea, and I'm thinking we could make that part of the onboarding. So when we're onboarding these partners, you need to review the Atala 101, the 2-hour course. It's an introductory, so you can kind of get familiar with what SSI and DID is. Should we do that, like, and build that into the proposal that will actually have, you know, an onboarding process for these partners, and that includes completing the, I think it's Atala 101, the introduction.
I put that idea on the user journey chapter, but this chapter we look into like, I think in a few weeks. So, but yeah, that's a great idea. So definitely.
I think Atala would like that, right? But it's all, that's what I don't get. It's up to the voters, right? It's up to the voters, not really Atala here. That's kind of funny.
But they can also like leverage, oh, we need this proposal because they are, if the assessing is available, perhaps they could assess like, well, they have a good plan. And who knows? Anyway, at least we are showing that we are trying to complete the challenge and we are also trying to help the community. It is also impactful, and it's like everything is kind of intertwined. So it's pretty good.
I like that.
Identify stakeholders, including issuers, holders, verifiers, policymakers, and their business requirements. Who we want to start issuing, holding, basically issuing, holding credentials and verifying them when we build these collaborations, or we make it a little more easier, permissionless. Yeah, just join in. Although you did already start mentioning that they go through this onboarding process, and then they will show us that, hey, you got this credential, and then we also give them another credential that they're well onboarded. They know this topic, that topic, they contributed to this discussion. Do we start to verify ourselves and all these participants with their contributions?
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, Tivo, is all this stuff we're talking about. If we have a project who's interested in integrating and they want to leverage, you know, some other open source platform or project, do we just start going to work with them, or do we first write, okay, here's the expectation that you need to understand Atala, so SSI and DID, here's some governance information. You've explored that. Read our standard documentation and understand that, and go through all this context. Then we can begin, right? Helping or assisting or whatever the case is, or just you can begin at that point doing your integrations and reaching out to that other community. So is that like a requirement that they do these things? If so, that could be a course or some form of education, and then they get certified or they get credentials for completing it. Like you said, our own, not just Atala, but you've gone through Atala, you've read the standard document, you've gone through some governance type of knowledge base education, and now you're ready. Is that part of it?
We could make it part of it, but and it's pretty hard question, because as we have pulled now, we don't really care of any of the standards. We just, well, there's a problem, we need to address it. How we do it? Let's do it like that. Do we all agree? Yes, and then we start doing it, and then there is no issuing. But for a professional level, you would actually want to get this context, because otherwise you would be spending a lot of energy who just want to kind of market their product. Hey, I have this thing. I don't know how your standard work. Let's make it work. It's still a good thing, because then we're like, okay, your platform has this, but then we may be spending a bit of time, hours, maybe even weeks, to kind of explain them all that, how it works, how do we get the component, what we need from them, and then they just simply give up and go away. Well, they didn't help me because I had to do stuff. I was expecting something else. If you have the barrier in front, then we don't really come to that. It's like more professional level, but then we have to lose all of these.
Yeah,
simple
yeah.
tools.
I as you're talking, I see the value in. You're right. We probably don't need to establish this at the start. But if we utilize, so the standard document and all the context we're talking about to build a platform, say it's Insight IQ or some other platform, that where you can go to have these conversations. So where communities can go to collaborate, and now you're building a UI to where those that are trying to, say, collaborate or leverage open source, they don't need to know all that context. They have a platform where they can go for specific conversations, specific topics, and they can kind of get to their desired outcome without all the required prerequisite context. But that has to be standardized, right? At least that's just how I'm seeing it, is the way they communicate, the way they govern themselves, the way that they get access to their workforce from their community, the way they get consensus, the voting mechanisms, the weighted voting, that all that compiled together alleviates them the need of going and taking Atala Prism and understanding what governance is, because they can just get directly to working. I don't know.
I'm looking at these steps to when I actually misunderstood the established or joint governance framework. We are technically, in my mind, governance framework was something else. It's like the way we interact, but in the context of this challenge settings, we are actually not doing a governance framework, because we are not issuing, we are not holding, we are not verifying. Although we could, then again, what you just said also kind of adds to this. When people start to say, this component is ready, do we verify that and say, this version of this component is verified and usable? And if you see that this component is with this model, everybody are free to integrate it, there are no issues with that. And then we would be doing a credentialing.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Ooh, that's a tricky slope. Yeah, that's going to be a difficult task. Just because we're not standardizing our stuff, that would be standardizing somebody else's stuff that's ready to be integrated. I don't know, is that the field that we're in? I don't know.
Another way is that we have like it's slightly like a rubber stamping certification, but it's still better than nothing. So that somebody puts up a singularity net AI to the marketplace, and a bunch of people are like, oh, this is great. I integrated it myself, but it's still not kind of verified because yeah. But it's then somebody's going, well, there is this thing. Does it work for standards? So somebody is like deliberately going through the standards and seeing, does it fit to the mold in a sense, or do we need to update our standard in order to accept it? But at least going through that mindset of going through it, you then establish that, like, yeah, we looked at it at least, and then we certified it. Right? We went through this.
It's been reviewed.
Yeah.
And it's in good enough state to where, we're okay with it, right? Like that's kind of all we're doing, but because there's probably going to be quirks and bugs and stuff that you need to work out anyways, So yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. So we do establish a governance framework. And we are going to issue stuff, but the things we issue are basically reviews. How many review credential review/audit credentials we need? I don't know, issue is there. And join a governance, establish or join a governance framework. Yes, technically, we don't really measure it, but we cannot going to do that then.
So it does mean, like, the way I'm reading that or interpreting that is it does mean specifically joining a working group on the Trust over IP platform, but then it says, or another host organization. So does like Catalyst and Catalyst and Deep Fund, do those count?
Actually,
I mean, it is governance framework in a way.
I think yes, and actually the way I read it, I mean, we can be the governance stack. We establish our own governance stack, and we say that through this standard, we go through this process of reviewing components like that, AI features like that, documents like that. And when we do that, we issue credentials like that. And if you want to review or verify these credentials, then you will have to find that component or an AI in this way. And that is the governance framework.
Gotcha. Yeah. No, I think you're taking their requirement to the next level though, because like the way I'm reading that requirement is really just join the working group and participate in a conversation. Like that's the minimum requirements. But then we're also talking about developing a governance framework. Yeah, that makes sense.
Because and then even this simple minimum stuff you mentioned, that is already governance. We just don't call it. We call it participation, giving feedback. But the governance happens of the output of that. So when the meeting or participation happens, people, this actually is good, or this has these issues here or there, then that already feeds back to our decision making of do we issue a certificate on that feature if the feedback is like that.
Yeah.
Develop a proof of concept, pilot, or commercial launch. Yeah, we technically don't measure that So again, like if yes, progress towards publishing a governance framework. Yeah, we kind of established that we're gonna do it, but we don't measure it. Establish the cadence of meetings and contributions and convene home parties to adopt it. And yes, we do, but I don't know how to measure.
I think, yeah, I think that's
hard.
like asking, or I think what we could provide there is a platform. What are we using? Discord? Are we using Zoom and Discord, Slack? Like where are these meetings happening? Where do we go for schedule, calendar, and conversation? And I think it would be value to actually identify those if possible. What do you
Okay,
think, Timo?
to me, this cadence of meetings, contribution, and conveniences are all the things, these workshops, these events, which we're already doing. And that's why
right, like where establish a cadence of meetings and contribution, which you have, and convene a home for parties to adopt and participate. So where do we have conversations? Where do I go to view the calendar, add it to my calendar? And where do I go to have debates or proposals, within this structure, this platform? That's how I'm reading this, is like, what's the home for everybody to have conversation, discussions, at least a starting place, and then have a cadence of meetings, which, you already sort of have that.
I don't know.
Could it be Discord or, I mean, I'd love for our platform, like our platform, and, checks all these boxes, but we're a ways away from having the platform usable.
Yeah, I'm gonna drop that question also into the user experience area. Where does user get to learn about our documentations and events? So it's like basically like what the entry point, but it's like a clear. So we do come back to that, but I would slide away from today to discuss it.
Yeah, definitely.
Because it's another big topic and which can open up different pathways. There was one more: key metrics, develop a proof of concept, pilot, commercial launch. Okay, so we don't really, okay, I turned it really, can't mention it. Challenge brief. Our latest challenge takes everything we have learned from making technical commonly user-friendly. Increased comes from growing understanding. This challenge to integrate target stakeholders within the product. This challenge is sound familiar to anyone has sound, blah, blah. Please review challenge. Yeah, I think we covered. And be done.